Our third paper in this session, that is from Ben Lee and Nathan Yarasavage. Ben is from the University of Washington's Computer Science Department, and Nathan is from the Library of Congress. Ben is a third-year PhD student at the Paul Allen School of Computer Science and Engineering at the University of Washington, where he studies human AI interaction. And he is also been in 2020 the Innovator Residence at the Library of Congress. Nathan, he is in charge of the production activities of newspaper and serial digitization as part of the Library of Congress's National Digital Newspaper Program. And he's got a background in library and information science from the University of Pittsburgh. So delighted to have you here. Today you'll be talking about from Chronicling America to the newspaper Navigator, improving access to historical newspaper photos at the Library of Congress through machine learning. So thanks very much. Over to you two.
Thank you very much, Sally. Thank you for that. Thank you for that introduction, and thank you for having us today. This is Nathan, and we'll just wait a second as Ben shares our slides. We'll be co-presenting today.
And my apologies, one moment, I seem to have some permission issues with sharing.
I don't know if the NewsEye colleagues, has Ben got the right permissions? Well, we can see your camera, so I think you can't do that without, so that may be a first good step.
Yeah, my apologies, something with my system preferences. I'll poke around at this for 1 minute here.
Great, that gives us time to have a quick breathe. I mean, there's a lot of presentations to get through while Benjamin sorts out the screen. Just while Ben is sorting out of his presentation, many of you will probably know the Chronicling America program that includes millions of digitized historical newspapers, and that's a joint initiative between the Library of Congress and NEH, or the National Endowment of the Humanities.
And actually, oh, my apologies. Looks like I fixed the problem. It's going to make me quit and re-enter, so I'll be back in 10 seconds and we'll be all set.
Great, thanks. And maybe some of you also know that this Innovator in Residence program is a very exciting program at the Library of Congress. It's also connected with the LC Labs program, which is one of the labs initiatives. Some of you probably know the International GLAM Labs initiative. So it's great to see some of this work being presented here at the NewsEye conference. And there is Ben already back. That was quick.
Great, I'm back, and I should be able to share if I'm presenting.
Great.
Sorry about this.
All these technical challenges we live today in these online environments.
And my apologies. Looks like I'm just a guest right now. Sorry about this.
Are the technical team there? Could you promote Ben to a presenter?
Yes, 1 second.
Thanks.
My apologies. There we go. All right, now we are all set.
Great. Yes, this is not only newspaper navigation, it's MS Teams navigation too.
Exactly.
Great, we can see your slides, and into present mode it's coming. It's just thinking about it.
There we go.
Great, thanks very much. Over to you.
Great. Thanks, Ben. And this is Nathan, and I'll be kicking off the brief introduction, and I'll be turning over to Ben shortly after. So hello, everyone, and greetings from Washington, D.C. I'm Nathan Yarasavage. As Sally mentioned, I'm a digital project specialist for the Library of Congress. And we're pleased to be joining you all today with my colleague Ben Lee, who I'll pass on in a moment. We're excited to share with you all some recent work on a project that Ben led called Newspaper Navigator. And this project reimagines how users can explore the abundant visual content, such as photos, illustrations, and maps that appear in digitized newspapers. And Ben achieved this by applying machine learning techniques to the Chronicling America database of the Library of Congress. So before I turn over to Ben to talk about Newspaper Navigator, allow me to give a brief update on the United States National Digital Newspaper Program and the Chronicling America database. The National Digital Newspaper Program, or NDNP, is a collaboration between LC, the Library of Congress, and the National Endowment for the Humanities, as Sally mentioned, and also partner institutions across the United States. The LC and NEH, they're both federal government agencies. The NEH provides funding to our state partners to select and digitize the newspapers from their states. In the Library of Congress, we manage the technical specifications, the ingest, preservation, and the access to the digital assets. All the newspapers digitized under NDNP are made available open access to the public via the Chronicling America database. So since 2008, we've been adding content to the Chronicling America collection, and as of today, we have about 17.8 million digitized newspapers from over 3,000 titles, and we actually have content in over 20 languages. Content now spans from coast to coast from almost all of the states and territories, covering dates as far back as 1777 and as recent as 1963. We add content to the site every month, and the program continues to fund new partners as well as funding returning partners every year. Now, as you can imagine, because the collection grows over time and it's subject to the selection decisions at each of our state partner institutions, we often get questions about the coverage in Chronicling America. In the visualization on the right, you can see that the bulk of our coverage, this is the temporal coverage, falls between the late 1800s up until about 1922. And the geographic coverage varies as well. The visualization on the left shows an example of how the coverage varies state by state. And this is because partners join the program at different times throughout the program. So we provide users access to these visualizations and others to help set expectations so they can better understand the data that's available in the database. So as you may imagine, use of Chronicling America's site is primarily through keyword search, through full text. But we also provide access to the data in Chronicling America via bulk data, OCR downloads, and various API endpoints, such as JSON responses. Additionally, all the data and services run from the cloud, which gives us extra flexibility. And as a result, we've seen many digital humanities projects using the data in Chronicling America over the years, and we continue to support these types of users going forward. We have a list of some of these projects on the NDNP website on the screen. So on that note, I'll turn it over to Ben now. As Sally mentioned, he's a third-year PhD student at the University of Washington. And from 2019 to 2020, I had the pleasure of working with him as he served as one of the Library of Congress's innovators in residence. And Ben's going to share with you all his recent and ongoing work on his Newspaper Navigator project, which, as I mentioned, applies machine learning techniques to the contents of Chronicling America. So I'll turn it over to you, Ben.
Thanks so much for that introduction, Nathan, and thank you all for indulging my brief technical mishap there. But yeah, so I'll be speaking about Newspaper Navigator, which of course is built upon Chronicling America and the wonderful work of the National Digital Newspaper Program. I'll also mention here that this work is very much in collaboration with LC Labs, or the Library of Congress Labs team, as well as my advisor, Dan Weld, in the Paul G. Allen School for Computer Science and Engineering out at the University of Washington. With that, I'll go ahead and dive in. So here are a couple of pages from Chronicling America published about 100 years ago. And I like this representation just because it gives us a sort of flavor of the underlying data. So we see both the sort of image level or the image plane here, which is digitized off of microfilm. But then there's also the underlying textual representation generated via optical character recognition, or OCR. And so OCR, of course, is what really opens up the corpus for all sorts of analysis and search through keyword search, as Nathan had mentioned. And so the general idea or intuition behind Newspaper Navigator is to ask how we can do something similar, but over the abundant visual content. And so the project is really built upon Beyond Words and draws a significant amount of inspiration from this crowdsourcing initiative launched by LC Labs in 2017 with the goal of engaging the American public through this really rich visual content in the World War I era pages in Chronicling America. So volunteers in particular were asked to draw bounding boxes around 5 different types of visual content. So this was photos, illustrations, maps, comics, and editorial cartoons. The initiative has been wildly successful. It's accrued thousands of verified annotations to date. In fact, it passed the 10,000 verified annotation mark as well, which is quite an achievement. And so I found Beyond Words around the time that it had launched and was able to follow along and just see really just how rich and diverse the visual content was that volunteers were identifying. So here's a little collage that I put together showing some of that visual content. And so, of course, this sort of derivative data set that came back out was incredibly exciting for all sorts of different kinds of projects, from creative computing to downstream digital humanities research. And so I also was thinking about this from the perspective of machine learning and realized that if there are these thousands of bounding box annotations, maybe we could use these as some sort of training data to train some machine learning model to automate the extraction of this visual content. And so that really concerns the first phase of Newspaper Navigator. To borrow some language from the Library of Congress's digital strategy, the question was, could we throw open this treasure chest by training a machine learning algorithm to process the entire corpus at scale? And then the second phase of the project would concern utilizing this Newspaper Navigator data set to then provide some new forms of search over the collection. And so the general idea behind the project is to facilitate research in a number of disciplines, including computer science, library science, and the digital humanities, but then also really try to have an intentionally outward-facing component per the Library of Congress's mission to engage the public and enable a wide range of projects ranging from creative computing to public humanities as well. And so the general intuition behind training this machine learning model is hopefully we can feed in a couple of newspaper pages. Here are a couple of pages published on the day after D-Day. We can get back bounding boxes that not just show us where the visual content is, but also is categorized on the fly as well, according to this taxonomy, where we also get headlines and advertisements if we add those annotations to the training data as well. And so I'm going to, and then we can also go into the underlying OCR, and within each bounding box, use this as a way of extracting at least some textual metadata describing each bit of visual content. In the case of headlines themselves, this gives us the actual textual representation of the headline. And so now we have captions. And so I'm going to just very briefly here walk through the intuition for training this model. Happy to return to this in questions. But the general idea is that I ended up utilizing Detectron 2, which is Facebook AI Research's for latest image recognition or object detection library. And I pulled down one of their faster RCNN backbones for object detection that have been pre-trained on a pretty standard data set called Common Objects in Context, or COCO for short, and then fine-tuned it on the Beyond Words annotations along with additional annotations of headlines and ads to give some very, very quick intuition for what this is. So object detection refers to, this machine learning task where you feed in an image and the system gives you back bounding boxes corresponding to where various objects are localized on the image plane. So here we see not only that there's a dog and a bicycle and a truck in the image as identified, but the system has also drawn bounding boxes around where they are. And there's this very natural resonance between doing this task on the left and then drawing bounding boxes around, say, advertisements or cartoons on the newspaper page on the right. And so that's precisely what this pre-training and fine-tuning network is leveraging. It's taking a system that can do the left, and then it learns faster how to do the task on the right. So once we have this trained model, we can feed in Chronicling America pages and get back out predictions. And so to give a sense of what the sort of full Newspaper Navigator pipeline looked like when we ran it last spring, we could pull down for each page using the Chronicling America API, the corresponding image, as well as the OCR in Metz Alto Standard, run the visual content recognition model on the image, get back out the visual content and crop and save it, then also go into the underlying OCR to grab the corresponding textual representations, then generate image embeddings for the search app, and then save all of this and push it back up to the cloud. And so now we have a pipeline for processing one page. The question then became automating this at scale. And so just very briefly about running the pipeline, we were able to process about 16.368 million Chronicling America pages. At the time, this was about 99.998% of the available pages, though the number, as Nathan had mentioned, has already grown to well over 17 million. In total, this amounted to about 100 terabytes of image and XML data. And processing this took about 19 days of wall clock time on these two EC2 instances, which correspond to 96 CPU cores and 8 NVIDIA T4 GPUs. And all the pipeline codes in Python and PyTorch, and I'll have some pointers in a minute to where you can find all of the code as well. Just to give a little sense of what the data set looks like, here are all of the maps extracted from 1861 to 1865 with high confidence. And if we zoom in, we'll see that pretty much all these maps are maps of the American Civil War. And so this begins to give us some, offer us a lens into how we can begin to use the data set for all sorts of interesting research questions. In terms of resources for the project, you can find the full Newspaper Navigator data set at news-navigator.labs.loc.gov. There you'll be able to query the data set using HTTPS and S3 requests. And we've also made available hundreds of what we call prepackaged data sets, which make it possible to download any type of visual content for any specific year or grab samples as well without having to do any coding as well. All of the annotations formatted in the Common Objects and Context standard are available in the repo, as well as Jupyter notebooks for training the model and running the pipeline. And we also put out a paper on this that was presented at the Conference on Information Knowledge Management last fall, where it received the Best Resource Paper Runner-Up Prize. And I just want to also mention that all of these resources are in the public domain, from the data set to the code. And so it's really our goal to really have to see as widespread usage as possible, including with the code. We're hoping to see other cultural heritage institutions utilize it for their own projects. And lastly, the visual content recognition model is also now pip installable through the layout parser tool as well. To understand the socio-technical implications of the construction of this data set, I ended up writing what I call a data archaeology, in which I trace the digitization pipeline and also machine learning ingestion through Newspaper Navigator to study these 4 different photographs of W.E.B. Du Bois as reproduced in Black newspapers in Chronicling America, to understand the ways in which microfilming and then the subsequent use of machine learning have profound impacts on marginalization and erasure, and also use this as an opportunity to reflect really on the sort of critical socio-technical lens on the kind of work that we should be thinking about when employing machine learning in this space. Here's a link to the DOI, happy to put it in the chat as well. And then lastly here, I just want to turn to the Newspaper Navigator search application, which concerned, now that we have the data set, how do we search over this abundant visual content that's been extracted? And so I ended up creating a search user interface for 1.5 million photos from the Newspaper Navigator data set. The idea here is to try to utilize what I call AI navigators to retrieve visually similar content. This is all very much sort of in the vein of my dissertation work on what I call open faceted search. The idea here is to really expose machine learning training to the user and make it fast to train and predict on all 1.5 million photos to retrieve these visually similar content. To give a sense of what the UI looks like, here is a keyword search for dog, and we can see, of course, fun images of dogs scattered throughout Chronicling America pages. And this is doing a keyword search against that extracted textual content for each bit, for each image. And then here is a UI showing how to train this interactive machine learner to retrieve images, say, of baseball players. So I've selected these examples, positive and negative, on the left to train this machine learner, and on the right, it's retrieved examples purely based on the visual features. And we see it's doing a pretty good job of finding baseball players throughout the collection, or here's another one showing sailboats. Here's a link and a QR code to the search app. So it's news-navigator.labs.loc.gov/search. And I very briefly just want to offer some provocations here related to Newspaper Navigator and the digital humanities, and talk about 2 collaborations that are ongoing. One is the question of how Newspaper Navigator can help us to see editors. This work is in collaboration with Jim Casey, Molly Hardy, Joshua Ortiz-Baco, and Sarah Salter. And the idea here is, if we look at the front pages of a newspaper, say of 1907 of the Opelousas Courier, we'll see some recurring patterns in terms of the layout of visual content, or the mise en page. And so here is a heat map using the Newspaper Navigator data showing the locations of advertisements on the front page bin by year. And so the question then becomes, given that we can look at this at scale, maybe we can start to infer visual similarity patterns between different newspapers and use this as a way to shed light on editorial practices. And then very lastly, this work in collaboration with Devin Narr asks how we can use Newspaper Navigator to study Ladino newspapers, which is a particular challenge because Ladino newspapers are very difficult to OCR because the lexical parsers of most OCR engines interpret the Rashi script as Hebrew. And so this really necessitated a way to understand how we could study these newspapers at a different scale. And the Sephardic Studies Digital Library at the University of Washington is one of the world's largest collections of Sephardic materials, specifically in Ladino. And so Devin and I are working to use the Newspaper Navigator model to extract all the visual content, which will allow us to study these newspapers at a scale previously not possible. And so let's see what's happening here. Anyway, this seems like the slide is loading, but okay, here we go. We can do some, TC style visualizations to see what the visual content, what similar visual content is appearing. And so, for example, here are all of the obituaries from Lavara clustered together. Here are different advertisements that are being reproduced throughout different pages of Lavara as well. And on that note, I just very briefly want to mention that this project has been in collaboration with so many people, NDNP, Library of Congress Labs team, and IT Design and Development at the Library of Congress, my advisor Dan Weld at the University of Washington, and then a whole host of external collaborators for whom I'm deeply grateful. With that, I'll just mention that this work is funded by an NSF Graduate Research Fellowship, the Library of Congress Innovator in Residence position, and the Richard Wilner Memorial Fellowship. And please feel free to reach out. Here's my email. With that, I'll go ahead and end slide sharing and allow us to move on.
Absolutely wonderful presentation. Thanks very much to both Ben and to Nathan. And you will see there are already quite a few comments and offers of collaboration in the chat. So if you have a look at those, and then we can come back to those in the discussion. So now on to, I think if I've counted correctly, the fourth presentation in this session. That is coming from Alix Chagué and Floriane Chiffoleau, who both work at the Almanac team as part of the INRIA program in France. Alix is a research and development engineer and the co-coordinator of the documentation and digital humanities program at the École de Louvre, where she now, her research areas focus on computational archival sciences, which is very exciting indeed. And Floriane has a master's degree in late modern history and is also a research and development engineer at INRIA in the Almanac team. I probably pronounced that completely wrong. Laurent will kill me. So today, Alix and Floriane will be talking about DAHN, an accessible and transparent pipeline for publishing historical ego documents. So welcome, thanks very much, and over to you.
Thank you, Sally, for the introduction. While Floriane is setting up the...
Is it good?
You can hear me, right?
Yes. Do you see the presentation?
Not yet. I think it's loading.
Oh. Strange, because I have it. What? I don't think you want to show it.
Maybe try stopping sharing and try again and share the desktop. Sometimes with Google Slides, if you present first and then share, it sometimes helps.
Okay, I'm going to try. Now is it working?
Getting there, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Yes.
I'm going to try to put it in. Do you see it?
Perfect.
Okay. Cool.
All right, so thank you, Sally, for the introduction, and also I want to thank you all the organizers for this wonderful conference. That was very, very interesting. So today we're going to present indeed a pipeline, like an accessible and transparent pipeline, specifically for ego documents, so no newspapers this time, but hopefully there are things that can be like information that can be taken for any types of works with other types of documents. This is a joint presentation, so I'll be talking and then letting Floriane talking, and we might go back and forth a few times, so hopefully it's not going to be too disturbing for you. All right, so maybe you can change slide. Fine, thanks. So when working on the transcription and edition of a corpus of archival documents, we often find ourselves in two types of situations. Either we're running a black box that does almost everything we want, but gives us no power to intercept data anywhere in the pipeline except at the end, and it doesn't let us customize a specific step that would be of importance to the project. Or we're led to use what we can call a scattered toolbox made of various softwares, which exposes us to several risks. For example, the obsolescence of a single one of these tools would question the integrity of the whole scenario, and the portability of data from one software to the next is not guaranteed and might force us to either waste time or sacrifice a portion of our metadata or data. Finding a middle ground between these two extreme scenarios is key to ensure an efficient processing of a corpus, where the integrity of the data is guaranteed and where the user has complete power over every step of the pipeline. So within the DAHN project, we decided to develop and document a turnkey pipeline for scientific edition, which meets these stakes. In 2020, in RIA, the EHESS and the University of Le Mans created a scientific and technological partnership with the support of the French Ministry of Higher Education, Research and Innovation under the project name DAHN, which stands for, excuse my French, Dispositif de soutien à l'archivistique et aux humanités numériques. Its goal is to facilitate the digitization of data extracted from archival collections and their dissemination to the public in the form of digital documents in various formats and or as an online edition. One of the main productions of this project is indeed the documentation of a complete scenario to automatically create a scientific digital edition starting from a corpus of physical documents. As a way to emphasize the importance of intermediary products and modularity, attention is paid to the reusability of the data at any point in the scenario. A most remarkable trait of the project is also its interdisciplinarity. By mixing these three institutions, the group is made of engineers and researchers who provide different points of view on the same project, which definitely roots it in the field of digital humanities. The mission of the Almanac team is to choose, develop, and enhance the tools that will be part of the pipeline created for the transformation of the corpus. We have to think about these tools in terms of adaptation to the user's goals, ergonomics, accessibility, and obviously the portability of formats.
So to elaborate and test our pipeline, we use a study corpus made of a correspondence between two diplomats dating from the First World War and continuing a few years after. During this period, the French senator Paul Destournel de Constant wrote to his American friend and colleague Nicolas Murray Butler and exposed the French situation as well as his defense for peace. One of the major points that determine our choice is the duality of this corpus. These letters are from the private sphere. There are personal correspondence where Destournel shares his experience and his opinion. But they bear a strong public dimension because they were intended beyond their initial recipient to be published in American newspapers as a report of the war and a motivation for the United States to engage in it. This corpus is of genuine historical interest, but it is also a perfect test subject because of its size and content. The correspondence is made of about 1,500 letters, with length varying from 1 page to several tens, which means that it is a big enough corpus for automatic transcription to be relevant. The first step of a pipeline, and as a matter of fact of every digital processing of an ensemble of document, is its digitization. Our corpus is peculiar because its digitization is not homogeneous. We started our experimentation with a set of photographs taken for another use by a member of the project prior to its creation. It sometimes results in cropped images, blurred lines, and incomplete pages, which can slow or complicate the process, but it also shows that for the most part, the pipeline does not require high standard images to function. We are currently in discussion with the Archives départementales de la Sarthe, the institution where the collection is kept, to start an institutional and exhaustive digitization campaign with proper material. The goal here is to be provided with high quality images for the subsequent publication. Once we have those images and their data, we will import them into a IIIF server in order to have them available for a web application. The pipeline we are developing aims at going from point A, the document is digitized, to point B, the document is published. To do so, there is a few steps that need to be executed: digitization, segmentation, transcription, post-process correction, encoding, and finally publication. In our scenario, we want to execute these steps one after the other without encountering problems such as the one we could have with a black box or a scattered toolbox. The core software in our pipeline is eScriptorium, but we also rely on several tools and frameworks such as IIIF for the distribution of images, TI-XML for the encoding of the transcriptions, and TI Publisher for the publication. For now, Python programs, which is the language used to develop the eScriptorium application, are used at different points to serve the data from one step to the next.
The capstone in our scenarios does the use of an OCR engine to produce a transcription. Various softwares are available, as you know, because we've seen many during this conference, but we decided to base our pipeline on the eScriptorium and Kraken solution. eScriptorium is a web interface for collaborative and automatic transcription projects. It enables the users to load sets of images, to associate them with metadata, to perform segmentation and layout analysis, to perform transcription, to train models for these 2 steps, and to export the resulting data in various formats, as well as to export the models. The platform currently uses Kraken as the core OCR engine, but it is intended to be an agnostic shell for any OCR engine. If one wishes to use another solution, it's possible. There are several reasons behind our choice. There are historical ties between the Almanac team and Scripta, which is the EPHE project team behind the Scriptorium. But also the platform gives the user a lot of freedom in terms of sharing data, documents, and models, and its interface is rather intuitive. And most importantly, it uses up-to-date import and export standards, such as the Alto XML and Page XML. It is entirely open source, so not only are we sure never to be stuck with a black box, but we're also able to build add-ons for the platform to gather into one place every tool we need. Overall, we've designed a pipeline relying exclusively on open source services and softwares, and we intend it to comply with FAIR principles. The segmentation and annotation of the layout is taken on by a system of line and region tagging coupled with an ontology. It is therefore possible to train with Kraken a segmentation model that automatically tags the types of zones and lines according to a modelization of the layout, which fits exactly the needs of a specific project. Of course, it is possible to rely on the Scriptorium's default segmentation model as well. It is valuable to be able to build your own modelization and pass it on to a segmentation model, because it makes possible the integration of a framework, such as the one provided by TEI standards, as early as in the layout analysis step, which then facilitates the elaboration of the TEI output down the pipeline. On this note, the DAHN project participates in the Segmento initiative, which is a working group aiming at creating a general TEI-based ontology for HDR projects within eScriptorium. Then to generate our transcription model, we coupled ground truth based on our own corpus with a generic model for French typewritten text trained on the corpus of ground truth, which we created besides. Let's briefly go over a few key rules we applied while creating the ground truth for our transcription model. Our document contained mostly typewritten text, but they also include handwritten insertions and manual strokes. For these manually added components, we trained our model not to transcribe them, but merely to signal them with a symbol, so the pound symbol or the euro symbol, which could have been any other symbol. Then handwritten insertions are transcribed manually because there are very few in a post-processing step. So the next step is the post-processing corrections, which are essential to finish the transcription and have it completely ready for encoding. This phase includes several tasks, some of which are automatically performed and the rest manually. So I already mentioned the additions of handwritten insertions. We use Python programs, which include several tools and libraries such as PySpellChecker, which, as suggested by its name, spell checks a text and suggests corrections based on the use of a Levenstein distance and a dictionary. The program processes the words in your text and automatically replaces the misspelled ones with their correction. The corrected text is then re-imported into Scriptorium. At the moment, these Python programs are peripheral to Scriptorium, but they can be fully integrated within the platform's workflow thanks to its API.
So we now have fully transcribed text in text format after exportation from eScriptorium, so we can proceed to the encoding. Our corpus is made of egodocuments, which are, to put it simply, documents written in first person regarding personal events. In a case like our corpus of letters, there is a pattern in the layout and the logical structure of the document, which can normally easily be rendered thanks to the TEI framework. The header is not really specific to egodocument. It encodes text as usual with the addition of a manuscript description to detail the information inherent to the corpus. The only specificity is in the profile desk, which contains few tags dedicated to correspondence that are specified and explained in the TEI guidelines. For most of the body, we use default text structure. The text is consequently encoded by using tags such as titles and paragraphs, as well as tags to encode the change, the difficulty of the corpus, and the name entities. Then we have to encode the correspondence part, and that's where it can become more difficult. There are easy tags such as opener and closer, and the tag nested in it like address, signature, or postscript, but there are also more complicated parts that require choice from us, like for example, letterhead. To develop this XML tree, we used information from the TEI guidelines, the TEI mailing list, and the special interest group dedicated to correspondence, and we wrote an ODD for egodocument documenting all the choice we made. Furthermore, to help with the encoding, we developed Python script to encode the metadata using an inventory field with specific information, and the body using regular expression helped by the pattern in the layout. So at this point in the pipeline, we possess images and TEI XML files ready to be published. The final steps consist of importing these TEI files in a specific application developed with TEI Publisher. TEI Publisher is an open source application based on XSDB, which loads TEI XML files and generates a complete web application using transformation files and templates to populate web pages. It's a very convenient way to quickly deploy an online edition of a corpus once the TEI edition is ready. Furthermore, it is easily customizable and extensively documented. So speaking of documentation, one of the ways to ensure the transparency of a workflow is obviously to document it extensively. This way, any person wishing to adapt it to their own corpus and objective can easily do so. The presence of documentation was one of our main concerns when developing the pipeline. There is, on the one hand, the initial documentation provided with the software, standards and framework we use, and then there is the documentation we produce ourselves. As we said before, we developed an ODD in TEI XML and wrote a comprehensive series of guidelines. All of our Python scripts currently existing outside of eScriptorium are properly commented, and we publish them in the form of interactive Jupyter notebooks, where it's possible to replicate a specific step of transformation. Finally, the data we produce is published on a dedicated GitHub repository, where one can see what the data look like at any point in the pipeline. It is therefore possible to replicate the entire pipeline from the beginning. So an experimentation we did with another corpus, the Berlin Intellectual, which is a corpus made of a correspondence from the start of the 19th century, enabled us to confirm two key aspects of a scenario: its modularity and its capacity to be generalized. It is possible to plug data in down the pipeline without following the steps from the beginning. As long as the corpus complies with the encoding rule we established, it is not necessary to have generated the TEI XML with eScriptorium and our script to be able to publish them on our web application. Moreover, our encoding rules and the publication are not limited by space and time. The Berlin Intellectual Corpus and Destonel letters span over more than 100 years and were written in 2 different languages. Furthermore, when addressing the question of sustainability, we wish to point to the fact that, on top of using standards widely adopted by the community, we ensure the dissemination of the data in useful format. This does not simply relate to TEI XML files, but also to the ground truth created to generate our transcription model. We contribute to the HTR United project, which is a commons project for HTR ground truth.
All right, so in terms of what we've gone through during this presentation, here are a few key takeaways we would like to reiterate. So in order to avoid a black box or a scattered toolbox scenario, we rely on a scenario fully documented and, most importantly, based on open source softwares and widely adopted standards. We build on the adaptability of the input and output formats of softwares like eScriptorium and TEI Publisher to go beyond our case scenario and consider the importance of modularity and the capacity of the scenario and tools to be generalized. So to conclude, if you wish to use our scenario, all you need is digitized images, a transcription system such as eScriptorium or Kraken, a TEI modelization of the structure of your documents, and finally a server to deploy a TEI Publisher application. So we wish to thank you all for your attention, and we will gladly answer any of your questions and comments. I've seen some questions in the chat already. Thank you.
Brilliant. So a huge virtual round of applause for Alix and Floriane. And yes, there's quite a few comments and questions already in the chat ready for the discussion. And fantastic to see how you really implemented FAIR and stressed the importance of documentation throughout the process. So definitely anti-black box going on there. Okay, just to wrap up, because we are running a little bit late, so there have been many comments and questions, discussions going on in the chat. And thanks very much to the NewsEye team to bring that all together. There's a lot of discussions going on, so I just wanted to just highlight a few of the issues and then go on to the final session with wrapping this conference up. So to say thank you very much to everybody. Now we come to the final presentation of our conference. Yes, this was originally supposed to be a panel, but because of the number of applications, we unfortunately didn't have a space for the panel. But we're great to be able to end the conference with this presentation. So the presenters are Jim Salmons, Timlynn Babitsky, Stephen Lomazow, James Hyman, and Ben Lee again. Just to give you a little bit of information about our speakers. So this is really coming from the citizen science area as well. We were very lucky to meet Jim when we were over at the Library of Congress doing a workshop a couple of years ago now. So Jim and Timlynn are citizen scientists who have been very active in the magazines and related to all of the data standards related to magazines. We also have Stephen, who is the owner and curator of the Great American Magazine Collection. James, who is the owner creator of HiMag, formerly the Hyman Archive, founded in 2011. And I think Ben has also been involved in the presentation. So in the abstract, it really says a lot of money has been spent on digitizing of newspapers. But now I think the panel and really plights for turning some of that expertise that has been learnt as part of this process to focus on magazines. So Jim and all colleagues, thanks very much for coming. Over to you.
To all of you for your patience, and to the NewsEye conference organizers for inviting us to present our panel, The Case for Magazines. To make this case for the importance of digitizing magazines as significant repositories of cultural and historical information to be data mined for research, Jim and I had shortened up our technical presentation and provided links to the relevant articles that cover our magazine ground truth storage format research. And Jim was only going to briefly cover our work in order to provide the bulk of our time to Stephen and James to really share with us their incredible repositories of magazines for making the case for magazines.
The thing that we wanted to do here, and this is the least technical presentation of the conference, but as Sally mentioned, what we want to do is make the case that we've got tens and millions of pages of digitized newspapers. And what we want to do is put a bug in the ear, the collective ear of the NewsEye and the larger EU-based digital humanities research community to start shifting some of our attention to the digitization and corpus creations for magazines. The way to make that case is to look at some of the similarities and differences and the opportunities that we have when we turn some attention to magazines. Both serial publications of newspapers and magazines have incredibly long histories in terms of being a unique trove for cultural heritage and human knowledge. They differ in the sense that most newspapers tend to be more frequently published, and they're like a spotlight on what is often a geographically bounded readership, a local a community, a city, a daily newspaper, or a national publication. Magazines, however, are tend to be much more laser focused, more like a spotlight on specific areas of human knowledge and interest. So you'll have magazines about sheepdog trials and knitting, and in our case, looking at specific brands of microcomputers. That similarity is also shared in the sense that while OCR has been increasingly accurate in terms of taming text, what has been, and we've seen so many of examples of this in the presentations over the last day and a half, the real challenge with newspapers and magazines is layout recognition because of the complex document structures that both of these types of serial publications have. The point that we want to make, and the area that we work in terms of our own research, is that we and most of the examples that we've seen when we've been talking about layout recognition at the conference has been what we would call within page layout recognition. It's a challenge in and of itself just to figure out what's on this page. The interesting thing is, and what we really think will be of value for both magazines and newspapers, is when we start to shift our attention from within page layout recognition to start to look at whole issue document structures and the relationships of document structures throughout from beginning to the end of a particular issue. So that when we look at something like a table of contents, we know that that is a hint, kind of a bunch of hints about what you'll find in the rest of the publication. There'll be things like article segmentations continued on such and such a page and whatnot. We know that when we start with a magazine, we go from front matter, where you're going to have the table of contents, masthead, letters to the editors, columns and things. We're going to eventually get to the feature well, and then in the middle of the magazine. And then towards the end, we return to the back matter, where we have some more columns and advertising index and whatnot. So we want to start to look at pipelines for digitization that recognize that when we digitize a particular issue of a magazine or a newspaper, that there is this structure beyond the individual page. In our particular case, we're working on the development of a ground truth storage format called Magazine GTS. Magazine GTS is built on an ontological stack of SciDoc CRM, FRBROO, which is the functional requirements for bibliographic research as an extension of the CRM, and PressOO, which is the ontology specific to continuing serial publications. At the individual page level, we use Prima's page GTS or XML standard. And in the chat, we shared a couple of links. One is a bit.ly to NewsEye magazine's URL. That is a kind of supplementary materials that has links to our DATEC 2017 and 2019 posters, our Neo4j graph gist, and the second one that is for the PressOO. In order to collapse our tech talk side of this panel, I wrote a long form piece on Medium about using PressOO issuing rules for moving up into whole issue complex document structure and how we've used that in the magazine GTS. So I would hope that folks take advantage of checking that out, because that's really where we're able to make the case for magazines, and in particular, the idea that we now have the opportunity to move from within page to whole issue digitization. One of the reasons that we proposed this panel is not only to recognize that folks like us as citizen scientists exist, but that there are citizen historians, and these are folks who have an avocation and a passion for collecting magazines and documenting our cultural heritage. And we have two of what we consider to be the most renowned private magazine collectors available, and we're so lucky to have them here today. Stephen Lamezo is a neurologist, medical doctor by day, but certainly a tremendous expert in the American magazine periodicals. And so, Stephen, please take it away and tell us about you and your collection.
Thank you, James. Well, I am, as Jim said, a collector. I've been doing this for 50 years. I've been collecting specifically with the idea of trying to document the American experience and American history as it relates to magazines. So the consummation of all of this has been a book that just came out called Magazines in the American Experience. And we have a show at the Grolier Club in New York called, by that name, Magazines in the American Experience, which documents and has pictures of and items from my collection of 50 years, documenting the entire American experience, beginning actually with a British magazine, Edward Cave's Gentleman's Magazine, which is the first time that it was ever used, the word magazine was ever used in the context. The original word magazine comes from the Arabic magasin, which means a storehouse. And of course, if you store bullets in a gun, it's in the magazine, and gunpowder on a ship is in the magazine. But Cave was the first one to use magazine in the context of a periodical. And in America, the first magazines were done by none other than Benjamin Franklin and Andrew Bradford. And I've been collecting these for 50 years. The exhibition has been well received. We have reviews in New York Times, New Yorker Magazine, and today it's in the Wall Street Journal, Smithsonian, many other publications, and we received widespread praise for what we've done. The catalog is available through the Grolier Club. If anybody wants to read it, I'd be happy to supply a digital copy of it for you. And I'll give you my email address, drlomazow@gmail.com. Also, the exhibition can be seen. An Omeka-based exhibition has been is online at the Grolier Club's website. Which I think it's grolierclub.org, but you can just find it by Googling it. I've also had a panel of magazine scholars to help me out. And I've also plugged into some other very important people. For instance, I've developed a very good relationship with the American Antiquarian Society, which, if none of you are familiar with it, they're in Worcester, Massachusetts. They've been there since 1810. And they have the largest repository of newspapers and periodicals before 1876, American ones in the world. That includes the Library of Congress. So their archivist, who would love to speak to you because he is a newspaper historian as well, and he's put together an incredible mass of undocumented newspapers. His name is Vincent Golden. His email address is vgolden@mwa.org. So my take on this whole idea is that what I've been telling reporters and people for a long time now is that magazines were the analog internet before there was a digital internet, and we're in the process right now of transitioning to a digital internet. People are always asking me what the future of magazines are. Well, there's always going to be a certain percentage of people who want the feel of paper in their hands. They're not dead, but they've changed in focus considerably. The days of the multi-million circulation magazine, like the Saturday Evening Post or Collier's or Life or Look, are over. But we still have tremendous amount of specialty magazines, and some of the old standard magazines from way back, like Harper's, which started in 1850, and Atlantic, which started in 1857, are still going strong and making their mark. A lot of magazines these days are making their mark in investigative journalism. Nonetheless, I have an immense archive. My focus is a little bit different than Jim's. Jim collects massive amounts of everything. I have limited space where I am. My collection includes my database includes 7,000 titles, 83,000 individual issues of magazines. Jim, but mine is really focused on first issues of magazines, important literary appearances, and important cultural phenomena as well. So you guys have my email. You have, and I'll be happy to answer any questions through my email. I'd love to meet. I'm actually looking for a European venue for the show. If you look at it and you like it, we might be able to work something out. I'm trying to get one in California as well, because the show's been immensely popular. It ends on April 24th. If anybody happens to be in the New York City area, I would invite you to go to the Grolier Club, which is at 60th Street and Park Avenue in New York City. We can accommodate, in the days of social distancing, small groups if you sign up. I don't know what else basically to tell you, other than the fact that magazines are an incredible repository. A day does not go by that I don't find information that I didn't know before. Unlike stamps, where you can go to the Scott catalog, or coins, where you can go to the Red Book, magazines are completely uncatalogued. So there are things that turn up every day that are unknown. And obviously, there's very little in the way of digital documentation. Some of the earlier magazines have been done. Hathi Trust has done some, but for the most part, they're completely uncatalogued and completely undocumented, and of great importance. Every day, something very important comes up, and I'm anxious to be able to partner with people to make magazines, as Jim said, give them their due, and they're quite important, have been important, and will continue to be important in a specialized way. But the history of magazines is very significant, and has a lot to add to the American popular culture and to the world's popular culture and to the history in general. So I thank you for this time, and I'll bring it back to Jim.
Let me turn it over to James in London. He has an amazing collection, just like Stephen, and we're so lucky to have him here for you all to meet, and hope that we can spawn some collaborations. James?
Thank you. Look, I must say, great to connect with everyone here. And Stephen, you know, I look forward to possibly partnering with you, and our like-minded kindred spirits is great. And Ben as well, Ben Lee is phenomenal. So thank you for having me. I wonder if I can, don't worry, I can share some stuff very quickly. I know everyone's pushed for time, so I'm going to be quick. I just completely echo and reinforce what Stephen said about magazines, their importance, the zeitgeist. I often say the same thing. Before the internet was created, magazines were the internet. Showing my age, when I was in the, one of my first jobs was working as a script writer for MTV Europe. Now, before the internet, your main source of getting your information was from magazine. My job was a script writer. I had to write little bits and pieces for presenters to talk about on air. The best source was magazines. You couldn't go online. It didn't exist. It wasn't there. You had these incredible magazines. So if it was a Prince weekend on MTV and you had to find loads of information on Prince, you go to a great Rolling Stone magazine, go through that little article on Prince, the 4 pages about Prince, and take out little nuggets. But anyway, if I can, hopefully, if I can share my screen, I have a very, very short 2-minute video that will distill exactly what I'm doing. I can show you one other thing, and then, you know, what it is question and answers.
James Hyman is a superfan of magazines, that is. HiMag is a record-breakingly huge collection of magazines, pamphlets, brochures and zines that James has picked up over the years. It comprises over 5,000 titles and a mammoth 150,000 individual issues.
HiMag is one of those world's best kept secrets. Help us liberate this amazing, invaluable content and make it accessible for everyone.
It's enormous. There has never been a more important time the time is now to preserve history digitally, and how better to do that with the world's largest collection of magazines, HyMag.
HyMag to me is like a dream world.
The most extraordinary treasure trove.
The breadth of the collection was what I was most inspired by.
HyMag is an invaluable source for curators, for students, for researchers.
A wonderland of magazines and rows that you cannot even comprehend.
Magazine heaven.
In order to understand what James and the team are doing, you have to understand the value of magazines above and beyond their contemporary purpose.
You don't just read the content, you also read the context.
Every single magazine is a crystallized moment in time.
And that's why it's really important that magazines be preserved and digitized by HyMag so that future generations can read that content and that context at the same time.
That's what James and the team can provide.
Digitizing HyMag is an incredible thing because it suddenly takes this incredible archive and turns it into a resource.
Being able to search this archive using modern day tools would be a game changer.
To have that material available internationally to researchers would be incredible.
Not digitizing them would be like losing the Library of Alexandria all over again.
I just want to quickly show you, very quickly, kind of taking on almost what Ben was showing with his remarkable presentation on, I mean, how I'd love to apply his tools to what I'm trying to do. I mean, we're doing slowly but surely digitizing, going direct to lots of publishers and getting agreements with these publishers to digitize. And to give you just a little example of, you know, to show you a few things about the power of the rich content. You all know that if you aggregate all these magazines together. I mean, I'm going to put in, for example, fashion model Kate Moss, because with that we get a lot of fashion students. Can you all see my screen here? Yeah?
Yes.
Everyone can see, right? So here you go, loads of articles, pictures, images, obvious filters. You could filter by covers. So you're just saying, I just want to see Kate Moss in Vogue from 1994 to 1996. You could go even deeper and say her hairstylist, who is Sam McKnight. Anything that's Sam McKnight styled Kate Moss, color it just in blue. I'll give you an easy David Bowie, for example, where I think this content, look, again, OCR picks up everything with David Bowie, but where I think this becomes such an interesting, something in an example like this. So here's an item that Bowie wore. No one would really know, unless you're an expert, that that's a Bowie-related context. And I think the power of this is so exciting when everything is tagged, because it gives you such, you know, you could search by photographer, you search by stylist, you search by, again, as I say, you know, imagine you're a student and you're doing your project on, outfits Bowie wore in the 90s. Or, again, I mean, if I just went back and added, I don't know, smoking here. Okay, the OCR, look, it picks up the words, David Bowie and smoking. Of course, OCR is almost a given these days, but look, there you get the images. So give me the first picture that, you know, of David Bowie smoking in, I don't know, Tatler magazine. And final example, just to kind of ram the point home, you know, the other day we had somebody from The Face magazine, which is a fantastic fashion Bible magazine that was from the 80s to 2004 and then got revived recently. And he asked us, you know, he was saying, look, this is what he would search: Beastie Boys and Adidas. And there you go, an obscure magazine called Mass Appeal. But look how rich this is. Okay, so you've got Adidas, you've got Beastie Boys, but you have so much information here, brands of shoes, that, you know, this, look at the detail just off one result. So yeah, that kind of really excites me about the potential. And then, if I've still got it here, just very quickly, a couple of slides I quickly was going to give to Jim. So this is kind of us, you know, one of our taglines is Spotify for magazines, but some stats, we've got 150 magazines growing through donations all the time. It's a blessing and a curse, really, because the more magazines I accept, I've got to pay the storage on them, which is painful when, you know, you're really struggling for money. Now, again, we fill a lot of gaps. that's just some testimonials. I'll whiz through. I don't have the slide, unfortunately. Yeah, but one of them here. So if you Google this lady, Eda Tasiemka, she was known as the human Google. In fact, I could probably quickly show you her on here very quickly. A remarkable lady, and she bequeathed her whole archive. She used to have a business of basically press cuttings, where you would ask her, you wanted a file on anyone, anything, any topic, whether it's a country, a person, an item, a trend, and you can see here, she had basically files on anyone and everything. Now I've got that, and for that, again, to be digitized is so priceless, and in my opinion, critical. So I will stop rambling because I'm conscious of time, and I will stop sharing if I'm there, and then maybe back to normality. Is that right? Are we all back on screens?
Yeah.
So I just want to kind of end to thank everyone, to thank you to Jim and Timlynn as well to let me just be part of this, and NewsEye, and to meet Stephen and Ben. And my passion is, I've been doing this for 40 plus years, and my dream is just to see this available for future generations. There was another thing. There's a great story of a lady who she just digitized the New York Post and again, the trend forecasting and what came out of that. I should type that in there. But it's that rich content. What comes out of it? And I just want that to please God be available to all future generations, researchers, journalists, broadcasters, documentary makers, fashion students. It's locked. It needs to be unlocked. This stuff needs to be available. It's, as Jim said in his sort of introductory here, this it's been done pretty much from newspapers, but magazines are such, they are still one of the most powerful mediums out there. They're surviving physically. Some of these magazines still are doing incredibly well weekly, but aggregating all that and letting it be a rich resource, I've said it, and that's how I'll end.
Super. Thank you so much, James. The couple of URLs that we shared, we have that bullet list of kind of supplementary materials. We'll add our slides, PDF of our slides in there so that you can, but also the Press OO article that I wrote to be the technical talk for this conference to share there is really something I hope attendees get a chance to take a look at, because this is really our passion, is to contribute and scientists to bring a whole issue approach to complex document structure, layout recognition. So thank you to our presenters, thank you to the conference organizers and to the community. It's just exciting to be a part of it. Thank you, and let me turn it back over to Sally.
Jim, Timlynn, Stephen, James, thank you very much for this fascinating deep dive into the world of magazines. It was wonderful to hear all of the technical standards, CDOC CRM, FRBR00, Press OO that were behind it, the Amica exhibition, and James's excellent search engine to divide in there. And I think that has really opened up our eyes to the sort of, the zeitgeist, the insight into contemporary popular culture that is possible, moving beyond newspapers and into magazines. So thank you very much for sharing that with us today.